As we've been reporting in our top story, Paralympian Oscar Pistorius will not be going home on Friday. Justice and Correctional Services Minister Michael Masuta has decided to suspend his release from jail pending a review by the Parole Board. The minister believes the board's decision to free him under correctional supervision was premature. We are now joined by Minister Michael Masuta from our parliamentary studios in Cape Town. A very good evening to you, Minister, and thank you for your time. Let's start with why this intervention now, just days before Oscar Pistorius was due to be released on parole.
Good evening and to the viewers. 2 days ago, I was approached by a women's rights organization with a request that I consider reviewing the decision of the parole board of placing him on parole with effect from tomorrow, which would be the date that he would have completed the 10 months period, which is 1/6 of his sentence as in terms of the Act. I looked at the reasons for their request and concluded that there was no basis in law that I should firstly review the decision, as I do not have the powers to review. But secondly, the grounds on which they were requesting the review are not provided for in law. However, upon perusal of his profile, as well as the decision and the date when the decision was taken, on the one hand, and the provisions of the relevant provisions of the legislation, I came to the conclusion that in fact it was not conceivable that the parole board would have been competent in law to consider his application prior to the expiry of the minimum period following which he could be considered for parole. And on that decision, on that basis, I then referred the matter to the Parole Review Board, which is the National Council for Correctional Services, which itself is headed by 3 judges, chaired by one of them, for them to review the decision of the Parole Board as is provided for in the Act.
Minister Masuta, are you then saying the Parole Board erred in its initial decision to grant Oscar Pistorius parole?
It erred because it was not empowered, it was not competent to consider the decision prior to the expiry of the minimum sentence period that he has served, which at this point in time only takes effect as of tomorrow. So it's only after tomorrow that by law they would have been competent to consider his application for.
So, Minister, if I'm understanding you, then they were incorrect in the calculation.
They were incorrect in deciding prematurely. They should have waited until the lapse of the minimum period, whereafter, by law, they would have been able to consider the decision. Whether it's a day after or a week after, it doesn't matter. But the full minimum period would have had to be served first before they were competent to consider him for parole.
Okay, Minister, you've now referred this decision back to the Parole Review Board. How long is that process going to take, and when do you think they're going to meet to discuss that?
I would imagine the law generally requires that decisions be taken within a reasonable period. I do not see this matter as exceptional. This is, we deal with thousands of parole applications on a regular basis, and it is a matter of scheduling that is in the hands of the National Council of Correctional Services, but I would expect it to be dealt with within a reasonable period of time.
Is the plan here perhaps to keep Oscar Pistorius in custody until November, when the Supreme Court of Appeal will hear that appeal that was brought by the NPA against the judgment and that sentence?
There isn't any such plan, certainly not on my part. All I did was to refer the matter to the National Council of Correctional Services. If they consider the matter day after tomorrow or next week and decide that he be placed on parole the very following week, I would have no difficulty with that. It's really got nothing to do with the appeal, the pending appeal.
Minister, how much did this petition that you received from the Progressive Women's Movement, how much of it weighed on the decision that you made? If you had not received this petition and had not looked closely at the requirements, would Oscar Pistorius be going home under house arrest on Friday?
Ordinarily, the decisions of the parole board in cases such as this are final. The only matters that are brought before me are matters involving people who are serving life sentences, where parole boards make recommendations to the NCCS, which in turn makes a recommendation to me, and I get to make a decision whether or not to grant parole in those instances. And that makes about 10% or so of the total number of applications for parole. The rest never reach me. However, if a matter is brought to my attention and upon perusal of the facts in the law, I am convinced that a decision has not been made correctly, I have an obligation, I believe, under the law to deal with the matter accordingly as I've sought to deal with it, with this matter in this instance.
Thank you very much. That was Justice Minister Michael Masuta coming to us live from our parliamentary studios. We'll be back with more news after the